$47 million. That's what my stupid and unmarketable app idea sold for last month to the biggest competitor of the CEO who rejected it. The same CEO who told me to stop wasting company time on consumer fantasies and focus on what actually matters. The same CEO who's now desperately trying to hire me back at triple my old salary. But let me back up, because this story isn't just about money or revenge. It's about what happens when someone in power confuses their fear of risk with market reality, and how sometimes the best response to being told your idea will never work is to go prove them spectacularly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Miller, and until recently, I was the kind of employee every startup dreams of having. 4 years at TechVision Solutions in Austin, Texas. 12 successful product launches under my belt. User retention improvements that saved the company over $2 million in customer acquisition costs. The kind of track record that should have bought me credibility when I walked into that conference room with what I thought was the opportunity of a lifetime. TechVision wasn't just any company to me. I joined when they were barely 50 employees, working out of a converted warehouse in East Austin, where the air conditioning barely worked, and we shared office space with a coffee roaster that made every meeting smell like dark roast. I watched Robert Chen, our CEO, turn his vision of streamlined business productivity software into something real, something profitable, something that mattered to thousands of companies trying to organize their chaos into success. Robert was the kind of leader you read about in business magazines. Sharp, decisive, completely focused on execution. He had this way of cutting through complexity that made you feel smarter just by being in the room with him. When he asked questions, they weren't the kind designed to make you stumble. They were the kind that made you think harder about your own assumptions. I respected that about him. Still do, actually, even after everything that happened. The culture at TechVision reflected Robert's personality. We moved fast, made decisions based on data, and didn't waste time on meetings that could have been emails. It was the kind of environment where good ideas got implemented quickly and bad ones died before they could waste resources. I thrived there. My background in behavioral psychology combined with product management made me particularly good at figuring out why users did what they did, and more importantly, what they needed even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. That skill set had served me well on every project I'd touched. When our project management tool was struggling with user adoption, I identified that the problem wasn't functionality but onboarding flow. Users were abandoning the platform not because it didn't work, but because they couldn't figure out how to make it work for their specific needs within the first 10 minutes of trying. I redesigned the initial user experience to include smart templates based on industry and team size. Adoption rates tripled within 2 months. When our client reporting dashboard was getting complaints about being too complex, I spent weeks analyzing user behavior data and discovered that 90% of users only needed access to 5 key metrics. But our interface was presenting them with 27 different data points on the main screen. I created a simplified view that highlighted the essential information while keeping the detailed analytics available for power users. Client satisfaction scores improved by 68%. Every success reinforced the same lesson. Understanding user behavior wasn't just about building features people wanted. It was about building experiences that solved problems people didn't even realize they had. That philosophy had made me valuable to TechVision, and I thought it had earned me the kind of trust that comes with proven results. So when I started noticing patterns in my own life that pointed toward a massive market opportunity, I approached it the same way I approached every other product challenge. I started with research. Real research. Not the kind where you ask your friends what they think, but the kind where you dig into actual user behavior data and try to understand what's really happening beneath the surface of what people say they want. The opportunity came from the most mundane place imaginable, my own grocery shopping habits. Like most working professionals in Austin, I was caught in this weekly cycle of good intentions followed by practical failure. I'd spend Sunday afternoon planning healthy meals for the week, write out a detailed grocery list, and head to Whole Foods or H-E-B with every intention of sticking to my plan. But then real life would interfere. The salmon I wanted would be out of stock, or twice as expensive as I'd budgeted for, or I'd realize I'd forgotten to check if I already had olive oil at home. By Wednesday, I'd be ordering takeout again, watching the organic vegetables I'd optimistically purchased slowly decompose in my refrigerator, while I told myself I'd definitely use them in tomorrow's lunch. The waste bothered me, but more than that, the inefficiency bothered me. I was spending time planning, money shopping, and mental energy feeling guilty about the gap between my intentions and my execution. I started paying attention to other people's shopping carts, listening to conversations in grocery store aisles, watching how people interacted with their phones while navigating the produce section. What I discovered was that my experience wasn't unique, it was universal. Almost everyone was dealing with some version of the same problem: the disconnect between meal planning in theory and grocery shopping in reality. The existing solutions weren't actually solving the core issue. There were meal planning apps that gave you recipes. There were grocery list apps that helped you organize your shopping. There were budget tracking apps that told you how much you were spending. But none of them were addressing the fundamental friction point: that meal planning and grocery shopping exist in completely different contexts with completely different constraints. When you're meal planning, you're thinking about nutrition, variety, and what sounds appealing. When you're grocery shopping, you're thinking about what's available, what's affordable, and what's practical given your time constraints. Those two contexts rarely align perfectly, and when they don't, the whole system breaks down. That's when I started thinking about this differently. What if there was a way to bridge that gap? What if meal planning could happen in real time, taking into account not just what you wanted to eat, but what was actually available and affordable in the store where you were shopping right now? I spent the next 3 months researching this idea in my spare time. I interviewed grocery store managers about inventory systems and seasonal pricing patterns. I analyzed public data about food waste and grocery shopping behavior. I studied the business models of existing meal planning services and identified where they were leaving money on the table. I even spent weekend afternoons hanging out in different grocery stores, watching how people made decisions and where they got stuck. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that this wasn't just a nice-to-have convenience feature. This was a massive market inefficiency that nobody was addressing comprehensively. Americans waste approximately $160 billion worth of food every year, and a significant portion of that waste happens because of poor planning and impulse purchasing decisions. Grocery stores struggle with inventory management because they can't predict demand accurately. Consumers struggle with meal planning because they can't predict availability and pricing. But what if those problems could solve each other? What if grocery stores could share real-time inventory and pricing data with a meal planning platform that could suggest recipes based on what was actually available and affordable? What if consumers could make meal decisions based on current market conditions instead of wishful thinking about what they hoped would be in stock? The technical challenges were significant but not insurmountable. The business model was clear, the market size was enormous, and most importantly, it solved a real problem that millions of people experienced every single week. I put together a comprehensive presentation. Not just the high-level concept, but detailed market research, competitive analysis, technical architecture, potential partnership strategies, and financial projections. I identified specific grocery chains that had already expressed interest in data partnerships. I outlined a development timeline that could get us to market in 8 months. I even secured preliminary conversations with 2 investors who specialized in consumer health technology. When I requested time on the agenda for our quarterly product review meeting, I thought I was bringing Robert the kind of opportunity that startup CEOs dream about. A chance to expand into a new market with massive potential, backed by solid research and a clear path to execution. I thought my track record had earned me the benefit of the doubt on big ideas. I was about to learn that sometimes track records don't matter as much as you think they do. Sometimes the biggest risk isn't whether your idea will work, it's whether the person in charge of deciding has the courage to let you try. The quarterly product review meeting was held in TechVision's main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Austin skyline. Robert sat at the head of the table, flanked by our head of engineering, our marketing director, and our CFO. I'd presented in this room dozens of times before, but something felt different this time. Maybe it was the scope of what I was proposing, or maybe it was the fact that this idea came from my own initiative rather than responding to an existing business need. I walked them through the research methodically. The market size data, the user behavior patterns, the competitive landscape analysis, the technical feasibility assessment, the partnership opportunities, the financial projections that showed a path to profitability within 18 months. Robert listened carefully, asking occasional clarifying questions that demonstrated he was following the logic. The engineering lead seemed intrigued by the technical challenges. The marketing director took notes about the target demographic analysis. For 45 minutes, it felt like the kind of productive strategic discussion that had led to our best product decisions in the past. Then I got to the implementation proposal. The request for dedicated development resources, the budget requirements for partnerships and initial marketing, the timeline that would require shifting some focus away from our existing product roadmap. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's when the energy in the room changed. Robert's questions became more skeptical. The CFO started asking about risk mitigation strategies. The engineering lead wondered aloud about whether we had the consumer market expertise to execute something like this successfully. But it was Robert's closing comments that told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to end. He thanked me for the thorough research. He acknowledged that the market opportunity was significant. He even admitted that the concept was innovative and potentially valuable. Then he said the words that every entrepreneur learns to recognize as a polite rejection. "This is really interesting work, Jessica. Let me think about how this fits into our overall strategic priorities and get back to you." In startup language, that translates to, "This will never happen, but I don't want to crush your enthusiasm in front of the entire leadership team." I left that meeting knowing that my idea was about to disappear into the same strategic planning limbo where good ideas go to die slowly and quietly. But I also left with something else, absolute clarity about what I needed to do next. Because sometimes when someone won't give you permission to prove you're right, the only option left is to prove it anyway. 2 weeks passed without any follow-up from Robert. Not a single email, not a casual mention in our weekly one-on-ones, not even an acknowledgement that the presentation had happened. In the startup world, silence isn't neutral. Silence is an answer. It's just not the answer anyone wants to receive. I continued working on my regular projects, managing the product roadmap for our core business tools, attending the standard meetings, and pretending that everything was normal. But underneath that professional facade, I was conducting my own quiet experiment. I was watching how decisions got made at TechVision when Robert was enthusiastic about something versus when he was letting something die through benign neglect. When Robert loved an idea, the entire company knew about it within 48 hours. There would be impromptu brainstorming sessions, resource allocation discussions, and timeline planning meetings. He'd mention it in all-hands meetings, reference it in casual conversations, and ask different team members for their perspectives on implementation challenges. The energy was infectious. You could feel the organization aligning around a shared vision. When Robert was indifferent to an idea, the opposite happened. The concept would simply disappear from all conversations, as if it had never been proposed. No formal rejection, no explanation of concerns, no invitation to iterate or refine the approach. Just silence that stretched until everyone understood that pursuing the topic further would be a waste of political capital. My meal planning concept was clearly in the second category. The strategic priorities discussion Robert had mentioned never materialized. When I tried to bring up consumer market opportunities in our next leadership meeting, the conversation was quickly redirected to our existing product enhancement pipeline. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't worth discussing further. That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could accept Robert's implicit rejection and focus on being the best possible product manager within the boundaries he'd established. Or I could document his position clearly and then pursue the opportunity anyway, on my own time and with my own resources. The decision was easier than I expected. 4 years of watching TechVision grow had taught me that the most valuable skill in the startup world isn't the ability to execute someone else's vision perfectly. It's the ability to recognize opportunities that others miss and then create value where none existed before. Robert had taught me that lesson himself, even if he didn't realize he was about to become a case study in what happens when you stop applying it. I scheduled a 15-minute meeting with Robert under the pretense of seeking clarity on our Q4 product priorities. It was a reasonable request from a product manager who needed to allocate her time effectively across multiple initiatives. Nothing about the meeting invitation suggested I was fishing for a definitive answer about the meal planning concept. When I walked into Robert's office that Thursday afternoon, he was reviewing financial projections on his laptop, surrounded by the usual chaos of sticky notes, coffee cups, and printed reports that characterized his workspace. His office was a reflection of his management style, organized enough to function efficiently, but messy enough to signal that he was always juggling multiple priorities simultaneously. "Jessica, good to see you," he said, closing the laptop and giving me his full attention. "What's on your mind for Q4 planning?" I had prepared for this conversation carefully. My goal wasn't to relitigate the meal planning concept or to pressure him into changing his mind. My goal was to get his perspective on record in a way that would clarify my own path forward. "I wanted to make sure I understand our strategic priorities correctly," I began. "Specifically, I want to confirm whether consumer market opportunities are still worth exploring, or if we should focus exclusively on enterprise solutions for the foreseeable future." Robert leaned back in his chair, and I could see him processing the subtext of my question. He knew I wasn't really asking about general strategy. I was asking about the meal planning app. "That's a fair question," he said after a moment. "Look, the consumer market research you did was impressive. Really impressive. But I've been thinking about it, and I just don't see how it fits with our core competencies right now." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The enterprise productivity market is what we understand. It's where we have credibility, where we have relationships, where we have a proven ability to execute. Jumping into consumer applications, especially something as complex as meal planning and grocery integration, feels like a distraction from what we do best." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. The more specific his concerns, the better I could understand whether this was about the concept itself or about TechVision's readiness to pursue it. "Plus, the consumer market is just so saturated," he continued. "There are already dozens of meal planning apps out there. Some of them are backed by major companies with massive marketing budgets. I'm not sure we could compete effectively, even if we built something technically superior." He leaned forward, and his tone became more direct. "Honestly, Jessica, I think the opportunity you've identified is real. But I think it's the wrong opportunity for us, at the wrong time, with the wrong resource constraints. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, when we've solidified our position in the enterprise market, we could revisit consumer applications. But right now it feels like a solution looking for a problem we're equipped to solve." There it was, not a rejection of my research or my analysis of the market opportunity, a rejection of TechVision's ability to execute on that opportunity successfully. Robert wasn't saying the idea was stupid. He was saying we were the wrong team to make it work. That distinction mattered enormously, because it clarified exactly what I needed to prove. "I understand your concerns about resource allocation and strategic focus," I replied. "Can you help me understand which specific capabilities you think we'd need to develop to be successful in the consumer market? Is it mainly about marketing and user acquisition, or are there technical challenges you're worried about?" Robert considered the question thoughtfully. "It's really about expertise and market positioning," he said. "Consumer applications require a completely different approach to user experience design. The tolerance for complexity is much lower, the expectations for polish are much higher, and the competition for attention is brutal. We've never had to think about App Store optimization, social media marketing, or influencer partnerships. We've never had to design for people who are using our product while standing in a grocery store, trying to make quick decisions with their phone in one hand and a shopping cart in the other." He was right about all of that. TechVision's success in the enterprise market came from solving complex workflow problems for users who were willing to invest time learning sophisticated tools. Consumer applications required solving simple problems elegantly for users who would abandon anything that took longer than 30 seconds to understand. "The other issue is partnerships," Robert continued. "Your concept depends on integrating with grocery store inventory systems. We don't have any relationships in that industry. We don't understand their business models, their technical constraints, or their decision-making processes. Building those partnerships would be a full-time job for someone with retail industry experience, and we don't have that person." Again, he was absolutely correct. The meal planning concept I'd proposed required capabilities that TechVision had never developed, and relationships that would take months or years to establish. From his perspective, pursuing the opportunity would mean diverting resources away from areas where the company had clear competitive advantages toward areas where they would be starting from scratch. But from my perspective, Robert's analysis revealed something important. His concerns weren't about whether the opportunity was real or whether consumers would pay for a better solution. His concerns were about whether TechVision specifically could execute on the opportunity successfully with their current team and capabilities. That meant the opportunity itself remained valid. It just required a different approach than trying to convince TechVision to pursue it internally. "That makes sense," I said. "So if I'm understanding correctly, you think the market opportunity is legitimate, but you don't think it's the right strategic fit for our company at this stage of our development." "Exactly," Robert replied. "And I want to be clear that this isn't a reflection on the quality of your research or your product instincts. You identified something real. I just don't think we're the right team to capitalize on it." Perfect. That was exactly the clarification I needed. "Can you send me a brief email summarizing your perspective on this?" I asked. "I want to make sure I'm allocating my time appropriately across our existing priorities, and it would be helpful to have your guidance in writing." Robert agreed immediately. From his perspective, documenting his strategic reasoning was just good management practice. It would help ensure that I focused on projects where TechVision could realistically succeed, rather than pursuing opportunities that were beyond the company's current capabilities. From my perspective, that email would become the most important piece of documentation I never expected to need. Because I was about to prove that the opportunity Robert considered too challenging for TechVision to pursue was actually too valuable for anyone to ignore. The email arrived in my inbox the next morning, and it was even more comprehensive than I'd hoped. Robert had outlined his concerns about market saturation, technical complexity, partnership requirements, and resource allocation in detail. He'd acknowledged the legitimacy of the market opportunity while explaining why he believed TechVision wasn't positioned to pursue it successfully. The tone was professional, thoughtful, and completely respectful of my research and analysis. It was also completely wrong about what was possible with the right approach and the right team. I printed the email, filed it carefully in a folder I labeled Strategic Decisions, and began planning my real response to Robert's concerns. Not the response where I tried to change his mind about TechVision's capabilities. The response where I proved that the opportunity was too compelling to require his permission. That same week, Robert announced a new initiative that perfectly illustrated the difference between his risk tolerance and mine. TechVision would be investing significant development resources in an enhanced enterprise dashboard feature, designed to provide more sophisticated data visualization capabilities for our existing corporate clients. The project made perfect sense from Robert's perspective. It leveraged TechVision's existing strengths in enterprise software development. It addressed documented feature requests from current customers. It required no new partnerships, no unfamiliar marketing channels, and no technical capabilities the team didn't already possess. The path from concept to revenue was clear, predictable, and almost certainly successful. To lead the dashboard enhancement project, Robert hired 2 new developers who had just graduated from the University of Texas Computer Science program. Kevin Martinez and Amanda Walsh were exactly the kind of talent that Austin's tech scene attracted: smart, ambitious, and eager to prove themselves on challenging technical problems. Kevin was particularly impressive during the interview process. He'd built several sophisticated web applications as personal projects, demonstrated fluency with the latest development frameworks, and articulated thoughtful opinions about user interface design principles. His portfolio showed clean, efficient code and a strong aesthetic sense for modern application design. Amanda brought complementary skills in data visualization and back-end optimization. She'd spent a summer internship at a financial services company, building analytics dashboards that processed millions of transactions daily. Her experience with performance optimization and scalable architecture would be crucial for enhancing TechVision's enterprise reporting capabilities. Both new hires embodied the confidence that comes from recent education, combined with limited, real-world experience. They understood current best practices in software development, but they hadn't yet encountered the kind of complex legacy systems and unexpected user behavior patterns that separate theoretical knowledge from practical expertise. During their first week at TechVision, I had the opportunity to observe how they approached problem solving. Kevin's instinct was to rebuild systems from scratch using modern tools and architectural patterns. Amanda's preference was to optimize existing processes through more sophisticated algorithms and data structures. Both approaches were technically sound and reflected current industry trends toward cleaner, more maintainable code. In team meetings, Kevin would frequently suggest that older parts of our codebase could benefit from complete rewrites using newer frameworks. He'd identify functions that seemed unnecessarily complex and propose simplified alternatives that would be easier to maintain and extend. His suggestions were usually correct from a purely technical perspective. Amanda had similar instincts for data processing workflows. She'd analyze our existing reporting algorithms and identify opportunities for performance improvements through more efficient database queries or caching strategies. Her optimizations typically reduced processing time and server resource usage significantly. Robert was thrilled with both hires. Here was proof that his approach to strategic focus was working. Instead of chasing speculative opportunities in unfamiliar markets, TechVision was doubling down on areas where they had clear expertise and hiring talented people who could execute improvements efficiently. The Enterprise Dashboard Enhancement Project became a showcase for Kevin and Amanda's capabilities. They worked collaboratively, communicated effectively with stakeholders, and delivered features ahead of schedule. Within 6 weeks, they had implemented sophisticated data visualization tools that exceeded our clients' original feature requests. Robert began referencing their work in company-wide meetings as an example of what became possible when the team focused on their core competencies rather than getting distracted by adjacent opportunities. The implicit message was clear. This was what success looked like when you stayed in your lane and executed excellently within established capabilities. I congratulated Kevin and Amanda on their successful project delivery and meant it sincerely. They had done excellent work that created real value for TechVision's clients. But I also noticed something that Robert didn't seem to recognize. Their approach to problem solving was optimized for environments where requirements were clearly defined and success metrics were easily measurable. Consumer applications operated under completely different constraints. Success required understanding user behavior patterns that couldn't be predicted through logical analysis. It required building experiences that felt intuitive to people who had no technical training and no patience for learning complex interfaces. It required making thousands of small design decisions based on psychological factors rather than purely functional considerations. Kevin and Amanda were excellent enterprise developers. But enterprise development skills and consumer application skills were related the same way that building bridges and designing jewelry were related. Both required engineering expertise, but the specific challenges, constraints, and success criteria were fundamentally different. That distinction would become important later. But for now, Robert's confidence in his strategic approach was being reinforced daily by Kevin and Amanda's successful execution of clearly defined technical challenges. Meanwhile, I was spending my evenings and weekends conducting a very different kind of experiment. While TechVision was optimizing their existing capabilities, I was building something that would test whether Robert's assessment of the consumer market opportunity was accurate. The first step was assembling a team that actually understood consumer application development. Through my network of Austin-area freelancers and consultants, I found Marcus Chen, a mobile app developer who had previously worked on 3 successful consumer applications that had achieved significant user adoption. Marcus understood the specific technical challenges of building apps that needed to work reliably in grocery stores, with inconsistent internet connectivity and varying screen brightness conditions. I also connected with Sarah Kim, a user experience designer who specialized in consumer applications for time-constrained environments. Sarah had previously designed interfaces for apps used in retail settings, and she understood how to create decision-making flows that worked when users were distracted, hurried, and often juggling multiple priorities simultaneously. For business development, I reached out to Diana Rodriguez, a former grocery industry executive who had recently started consulting for food technology startups. Diana understood grocery store operations, inventory management systems, and the business factors that influenced partnership decisions in the retail food industry. This team represented exactly the kind of consumer market expertise that Robert had identified as missing from TechVision's capabilities. They understood the technical, design, and business challenges specific to the opportunity I wanted to pursue. More importantly, they were available for freelance work and willing to take on a project that might not generate immediate revenue. I invested $12,000 of my own savings to fund the initial development phase. That wasn't enough money to build a complete application, but it was enough to create a working prototype that could demonstrate the core concept and validate whether consumers would actually use the solution I was proposing. The prototype development took 3 months of part-time work. While I continued managing my responsibilities at TechVision during the day, I spent evenings and weekends collaborating with Marcus, Sarah, and Diana to build something that addressed the fundamental friction points I'd identified in grocery shopping and meal planning. The application we created was intentionally simple. Users could input their dietary preferences, budget constraints, and household size. The app would then suggest meal plans based on what was currently available and affordable at their preferred grocery stores. The suggestions included complete shopping lists organized by store layout, estimated total costs, and cooking instructions optimized for busy schedules. The technical innovation wasn't in any individual feature. Meal planning apps existed, grocery list apps existed, store inventory tracking existed. The innovation was in connecting these capabilities in a way that eliminated the friction between meal planning and grocery shopping that caused most people to abandon their good intentions. During the final month of prototype development, Diana secured partnerships with 2 local Austin grocery stores that were willing to share limited inventory and pricing data in exchange for customer traffic analytics. These partnerships were crucial for demonstrating that the concept could work with real-world data, rather than theoretical assumptions about grocery store operations. By the time the prototype was ready for testing, I had spent 3 months working essentially 2 full-time jobs. My performance at TechVision remained strong, but I was exhausted from the sustained effort of building something significant while maintaining all my existing responsibilities. The exhaustion was worth it, though, because I finally had something concrete to test Robert's assessment of the market opportunity. Either consumers would find the application useful enough to change their shopping and meal planning behavior, or they wouldn't. Either grocery stores would see enough value in the partnership to provide data access, or they wouldn't. Either the technical challenges of building a consumer application were manageable, or they weren't. Within 6 months, I would have data-driven answers to all of Robert's concerns about market viability, technical feasibility, and partnership potential. And those answers would determine whether his strategic caution had protected TechVision from a costly mistake, or caused them to miss the opportunity of a lifetime. The first version of FreshPlate launched quietly on a Tuesday morning in March, available only through a private beta link that I shared with 50 carefully selected Austin residents. I had spent weeks recruiting beta testers who represented different demographics, dietary preferences, and shopping habits. College students from UT managing tight budgets, young professionals juggling demanding work schedules, parents coordinating meals for families with varying food preferences and restrictions, retirees looking to optimize their grocery spending on fixed incomes. Each beta tester received the same introduction. This was an experimental meal planning application designed to work with real grocery store data. They would help test whether the concept could actually solve the everyday friction between planning meals and shopping for ingredients. In exchange for their feedback, they would get free access to the completed application if it proved successful. I deliberately avoided recruiting anyone connected to TechVision or the broader Austin tech community. This wasn't about impressing industry peers with sophisticated technology or elegant code architecture. This was about discovering whether ordinary people dealing with ordinary meal planning challenges would find enough value in the solution to change their established routines. The application Marcus had built was intentionally minimal. Clean interface, straightforward navigation, and core functionality that focused on solving one specific problem extremely well, rather than attempting to address every possible meal planning scenario. Users could input their household size, dietary restrictions, and weekly grocery budget. They could select their preferred grocery stores from a list of participating Austin locations. They could specify how many meals they wanted to plan and whether they preferred quick weeknight options, elaborate weekend cooking projects, or a mix of both. The magic happened when users clicked the Generate Plan button. Instead of receiving generic recipe suggestions, they saw meal recommendations based on what was actually available and affordably priced at their chosen stores that specific week. The application combined real-time inventory data with seasonal pricing patterns, promotional offers, and user preferences to create meal plans that were simultaneously practical and appealing. Each meal suggestion included detailed shopping instructions organized by store layout, estimated preparation times, and cost breakdowns that helped users understand how their food budget was being allocated. The application also provided substitution suggestions for ingredients that became unavailable or more expensive between the time the meal plan was created and when the user actually went shopping. Sarah's user experience design proved crucial during those first weeks of testing. Consumer applications succeed or fail based on hundreds of micro-interactions that enterprise software users would never notice. The difference between a user opening the application while standing in a grocery store and actually following through with their meal plan often came down to whether they could find the information they needed within 10 seconds of unlocking their phone. Diana's grocery industry partnerships enabled the real-time data integration that separated FreshPlate from existing meal planning applications. Instead of suggesting recipes based on static ingredient lists, the application could recommend meals based on what was currently in stock, on sale, or being promoted by partner stores. This meant users weren't constantly discovering that key ingredients were unavailable or prohibitively expensive when they arrived to shop. The first week of beta testing generated responses that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Lisa Chen, a marketing manager at a downtown Austin agency, reported that she had successfully planned and executed 4 home-cooked meals using ingredients she purchased for $38 total. For someone who typically spent $60 per week on takeout lunches alone, the savings were immediately noticeable. Michael Torres, a graduate student at UT studying on a tight budget, discovered that the application's bulk purchasing suggestions helped him reduce his monthly grocery expenses by 40%, while actually improving the nutritional quality of his meals. The application had identified that buying larger quantities of certain staple ingredients would reduce his per-meal costs, even though the upfront grocery store visits required larger initial investments. Jennifer Walsh, a working mother of 2 elementary school children, found that the application's family meal planning features helped her navigate the perpetual challenge of preparing dinners that satisfied both adult and child preferences without requiring separate meal preparation. The application's filtering options allowed her to find recipes that incorporated vegetables in ways that her children would actually eat, while still meeting her own standards for nutritional balance and meal variety. But the most valuable feedback came from understanding where the application failed to meet user expectations. Several beta testers reported that the meal suggestions, while practical and affordable, felt repetitive after 2 weeks of use. The algorithm was optimizing too heavily for budget efficiency and not sufficiently for variety and culinary excitement. Others noted that the shopping list organization, while helpful for navigation efficiency, didn't account for the reality that grocery stores frequently rearranged their layouts, or that certain items were often out of stock in their expected locations. Users needed more flexibility to adapt their shopping strategies when the physical store didn't match the application's assumptions. The most critical feedback related to timing and scheduling integration. Users loved having meal plans that matched their budgets and preferences, but they struggled to coordinate meal preparation with their actual weekly schedules. Suggesting elaborate recipes for Tuesday evenings when someone had back-to-back meetings until 8 p.m. created frustration rather than solving problems. Each piece of feedback represented an opportunity to refine the application's algorithms and user experience. Unlike enterprise software development, where requirements could be defined through stakeholder meetings and technical specifications, consumer application development required constant iteration based on real user behavior in uncontrolled environments. Marcus spent the following month implementing improvements based on beta tester feedback. The meal suggestion algorithm was modified to weight variety and cooking complexity alongside budget optimization. The shopping list interface was redesigned to allow users to easily mark items as unavailable and receive instant substitution suggestions. Calendar integration was added so that meal complexity could be matched to users' available preparation time on specific days. Diana expanded the grocery store partnership program to include more detailed promotional data and seasonal availability predictions. Instead of simply knowing what was currently in stock, the application could anticipate which ingredients would likely be featured in upcoming sales or seasonal promotions, allowing users to plan meals around predictable cost savings opportunities. Sarah redesigned several interface elements to better accommodate the reality of in-store usage. Larger buttons for users wearing gloves during winter grocery shopping. Higher contrast text for readability under fluorescent store lighting. Simplified navigation that worked reliably when users had limited attention available for complex menu interactions. By the end of the second month of beta testing, FreshPlate was beginning to demonstrate the kind of user engagement metrics that indicated real product-market fit. Beta testers were opening the application an average of 3 times per week. 78% were successfully completing at least 3 of their planned meals each week. Most importantly, 86% reported that they would be willing to pay for continued access to the application after the beta period ended. Those usage statistics represented something that Robert had believed was impossible to achieve quickly in the consumer market: sustained user engagement with a utility application that required behavior change. Users weren't just downloading FreshPlate and forgetting about it, the way they might with a game or social media application. They were integrating it into their weekly routines and relying on it to solve ongoing problems. The grocery store partners were also seeing measurable benefits from the partnership. Average transaction sizes increased by 12% among customers who used FreshPlate for meal planning. Customer retention rates improved as shoppers developed more predictable purchasing patterns. Store managers reported that the data sharing arrangement helped them optimize inventory management for perishable items by providing better demand forecasting. During this same period, Kevin and Amanda were making excellent progress on TechVision's Enterprise Dashboard Enhancement project. Their sophisticated data visualization tools were receiving enthusiastic feedback from corporate clients who appreciated the improved analytical capabilities. Robert regularly highlighted their work in company meetings as evidence that TechVision's strategic focus was producing measurable results for existing customers. The contrast between the two approaches was becoming increasingly clear. TechVision was optimizing existing capabilities to serve established customers more effectively. I was building new capabilities to serve an underserved market that existing solutions had failed to address adequately. Both strategies were succeeding within their respective contexts, but they were producing very different kinds of value. TechVision's approach generated predictable revenue improvements through incremental feature enhancements. My approach was demonstrating the potential for exponential growth through market expansion. TechVision's success reinforced Robert's confidence in strategic caution. My success was proving that strategic boldness could create opportunities that cautious approaches would miss entirely. The third month of beta testing brought an unexpected development that changed everything about how I understood the market opportunity I was pursuing. Diana received a call from the regional manager of a major grocery chain that had been observing the pilot partnerships with individual Austin stores. They wanted to discuss expanding the data sharing arrangement to include their entire Texas operation. The conversation revealed that grocery industry executives were dealing with challenges that I hadn't fully appreciated during my initial market research. Online grocery ordering was growing rapidly, but customer acquisition costs were enormous because most meal planning applications failed to drive sustained engagement. Customers would try grocery delivery services enthusiastically, then gradually return to in-store shopping when they became frustrated with ingredient substitutions, delivery scheduling complications, or meal planning interfaces that didn't account for real-world constraints. FreshPlate represented a potential solution to several of these challenges simultaneously. By helping customers plan meals based on actual store inventory and pricing, the application could reduce the frustration that typically caused people to abandon online grocery services. By providing detailed preparation instructions and shopping organization tools, it could make in-store shopping more efficient for customers who preferred that experience. Most importantly, by analyzing aggregate user preferences and shopping patterns, it could help grocery stores optimize their inventory management and promotional strategies. The regional manager was interested in discussing a partnership arrangement that would extend far beyond simple data sharing. They wanted to explore whether FreshPlate could become an integrated component of their customer retention and engagement strategy, potentially replacing several existing digital initiatives that had failed to achieve significant user adoption. This conversation fundamentally changed how I understood the business opportunity I was pursuing. I had initially conceived of FreshPlate as a consumer application that would generate revenue through subscription fees paid by individual users. But the grocery industry interest suggested that the platform could generate significantly more revenue through business-to-business partnerships with retailers who valued customer engagement and data analytics capabilities. The financial implications were substantial. Instead of building a user base slowly through consumer marketing and relying on subscription revenue that might never exceed a few $1 million annually, FreshPlate could potentially generate enterprise-level revenue through grocery industry partnerships, while simultaneously providing free or low-cost access to consumers. This hybrid business model would address one of Robert's primary concerns about consumer market viability, the challenge of customer acquisition and retention in a crowded application marketplace. If grocery stores were willing to subsidize user acquisition costs in exchange for customer engagement data and inventory optimization insights, FreshPlate could scale much more rapidly than traditional consumer applications. The partnership discussions also revealed something else important. The grocery industry was actively seeking technology solutions that could help them compete more effectively with Amazon, Walmart, and other large retailers that were investing heavily in supply chain optimization and customer experience improvements. Regional grocery chains needed innovative approaches to customer engagement that could differentiate them from commodity shopping experiences. FreshPlate had accidentally positioned itself at the intersection of several significant industry trends. Consumer demand for convenient meal planning solutions. Grocery industry need for customer engagement tools. Retail technology evolution toward data-driven inventory management. Food waste reduction initiatives that aligned with both consumer values and retailer cost optimization goals. By the end of the third month of beta testing, I had accidentally built something much larger than the consumer application I had originally envisioned. The user engagement data demonstrated genuine product-market fit among individual consumers. The grocery industry interest indicated potential for rapid scaling through business partnerships. The technical infrastructure Marcus had created was robust enough to handle significantly higher user volumes and more complex data integrations. Meanwhile, at TechVision, Robert was beginning to explore new market opportunities that might justify expanding beyond the company's traditional enterprise focus. The success of Kevin and Amanda's dashboard project had generated enough client interest to suggest that TechVision might be ready for more ambitious product development initiatives. In weekly leadership meetings, Robert started discussing potential adjacencies to their core business model. Could TechVision's expertise in business productivity software be applied to other industries? Were there opportunities to develop consumer-facing applications that leveraged their existing technical capabilities? What would be required to explore markets beyond enterprise software while maintaining their current growth trajectory? These conversations represented exactly the kind of strategic evolution that might have led to TechVision pursuing the meal planning opportunity if the timing had been different. Robert was arriving at conclusions about market expansion possibilities that mirrored the arguments I had made 6 months earlier, but he was reaching them through the confidence that came from proven execution rather than speculative analysis. The irony was becoming unavoidable. While Robert was cautiously exploring whether TechVision might be ready to consider consumer market opportunities, I was already demonstrating that the specific opportunity he had rejected was not only viable, but potentially transformative for any company bold enough to pursue it aggressively. The question was no longer whether FreshPlate could succeed as a consumer application. The question was whether it could succeed quickly enough and dramatically enough to prove that Robert's strategic caution had cost TechVision more than just a product development opportunity. It had cost them a chance to lead an industry transformation that was happening with or without their participation. The call from Innovate Corp came on a Wednesday morning in October. exactly 8 months after Robert had dismissed my meal planning concept as unmarketable. I was sitting in TechVision's break room, reviewing quarterly metrics for our enterprise dashboard performance, when my personal phone buzzed with a California number I didn't recognize. Jessica Miller, this is David Park, VP of Strategic Acquisitions at Innovate Corp. I hope you have a few minutes to discuss an opportunity that might interest you. Innovate Corp was TechVision's primary competitor in the enterprise productivity space, but they were also something that TechVision wasn't, a company actively expanding into consumer markets with significant capital backing and aggressive growth targets. Their recent acquisitions included a project management app that had grown to 2 million users, a personal finance platform that had achieved profitability within 18 months, and a fitness tracking application that had successfully integrated with major healthcare providers. David's call wasn't entirely unexpected. FreshPlate had grown beyond anything I had imagined possible during those late nights of prototype development. What had started as a 50-user beta test in Austin had expanded to over 40,000 active users across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Grocery industry partnerships had evolved from informal data sharing arrangements to comprehensive integration agreements with 3 regional chains and ongoing discussions with 2 national retailers. More importantly, FreshPlate was generating revenue that validated every assumption I had made about market demand and user willingness to pay for genuine value. The hybrid business model had proven even more successful than projected. Individual users paid modest monthly subscription fees for premium features, while grocery partners paid significantly larger amounts for customer analytics, inventory optimization insights, and targeted promotional capabilities. We've been monitoring FreshPlate's growth trajectory for the past 4 months, David continued. Your user engagement metrics are exceptional for a consumer utility application. More interesting to us is how you've created value for both consumers and retailers simultaneously. That kind of multi-sided platform development is exactly what we're looking for as we expand our consumer portfolio. He paused, and I could hear typing in the background. Would you be interested in discussing an acquisition that would give you the resources to scale FreshPlate nationally while maintaining the product vision that's made it successful regionally? The conversation that followed lasted 90 minutes and covered everything from technical architecture to user acquisition strategies to competitive positioning against larger players who might eventually enter the meal planning market. David asked intelligent questions that demonstrated Innovate Corp's serious interest in understanding not just what FreshPlate had accomplished, but how it had accomplished it, and whether the approach could be replicated in other geographic markets. By the end of the call, we had scheduled an in-person meeting for the following week in Innovate Corp's Palo Alto offices. The preliminary acquisition discussion would include their CEO, Chief Technology Officer, and Head of Consumer Products. They wanted to understand FreshPlate's technology infrastructure, business model, growth potential, and cultural fit with Innovate Corp's existing portfolio. One last question, David said before ending the call. Are you currently employed elsewhere, or is FreshPlate your full-time focus? I smiled at the irony of the question. I'm currently working as a product manager at a company called TechVision Solutions here in Austin. FreshPlate has been a side project that grew larger than I initially expected. Interesting. We're familiar with TechVision. Robert Chen has built an impressive enterprise software company. Does he know about FreshPlate? He's aware that I've been working on consumer application development in my spare time. We've discussed the meal planning market opportunity before. I see. Well, depending on how our conversations progress, you might want to give him advance notice about potential changes to your availability. That conversation would prove to be more significant than either David or I realized at the time. The flight to San Francisco gave me 6 hours to prepare for what could be the most important business meeting of my career. I reviewed FreshPlate's user data, financial projections, technical documentation, and competitive analysis until I had memorized every metric that might influence Innovate Corp's acquisition decision. But I also spent time thinking about the broader implications of what was happening. 8 months earlier, Robert had concluded that TechVision lacked the capabilities necessary to succeed in the consumer market. He hadn't been wrong about TechVision's limitations, but he had been wrong about whether those limitations made the opportunity itself unviable. The difference between Robert's assessment and reality had come down to execution approach. Instead of trying to adapt enterprise software development practices to consumer market requirements, I had assembled a team with specific consumer market expertise. Instead of attempting to build comprehensive meal planning functionality immediately, I had focused on solving one specific problem extremely well and then expanded based on user feedback. Instead of pursuing traditional venture capital funding that would have required rapid scaling and immediate profitability, I had bootstrapped development using personal savings and revenue from early partnerships. Innovate Corp's Palo Alto offices reflected the kind of resources that could accelerate FreshPlate's growth exponentially. The Consumer Products Division occupied 2 full floors of a downtown high-rise, with dedicated teams for user experience research, marketing analytics, partnership development, and customer support. Their technical infrastructure could handle millions of users across dozens of geographic markets simultaneously. The acquisition discussion lasted 6 hours and covered every aspect of FreshPlate's operations in detail. CEO Maria Rodriguez demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had made Innovate Corp successful in multiple market segments. She understood immediately why the hybrid business model created sustainable competitive advantages and how grocery industry partnerships could be leveraged to accelerate user acquisition in new markets. Chief Technology Officer Andrew Chen was particularly interested in the data architecture that enabled real-time integration with grocery store inventory systems. The technical challenges of synchronizing meal planning algorithms with constantly changing retail inventory data were exactly the kind of complex problems that Innovate Corp's engineering teams excelled at solving at scale. Head of Consumer Products Linda Zhang asked detailed questions about user behavior patterns, retention strategies, and feature development priorities. Her experience with other consumer utility applications helped her understand why FreshPlate had achieved sustained engagement when most meal planning apps struggled with user abandonment after the initial download period. The financial discussion exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Innovate Corp's preliminary offer valued FreshPlate at $47 million, reflecting both current revenue and projected growth potential under their ownership. The acquisition would include continued development resources, expanded grocery industry partnerships, and integration with Innovate Corp's existing consumer application ecosystem. More importantly, from my perspective, the acquisition terms included a leadership role that would allow me to guide FreshPlate's expansion while leveraging Innovate Corp's infrastructure and market relationships. Instead of selling the application and walking away, I would become VP of Consumer Food Technology, responsible for scaling FreshPlate nationally and developing additional products that addressed adjacent opportunities in the meal planning and grocery industry space. There's one aspect of this acquisition that makes it particularly interesting, Maria said during our final discussion. We've been watching TechVision's growth trajectory as well. Robert Chen has built an impressive enterprise software company, but they've remained focused exclusively on business productivity applications. This acquisition would give us a significant competitive advantage in a market segment that TechVision has explicitly chosen not to pursue. The irony was even deeper than Maria realized. By acquiring FreshPlate, Innovate Corp would gain access to grocery industry relationships, consumer market expertise, and proven user engagement strategies that positioned them to compete more effectively against companies like TechVision, who might eventually decide to expand beyond enterprise software. Robert would discover that his decision to reject the meal planning opportunity hadn't just cost TechVision a potential product line. It had strengthened their primary competitor's position in a rapidly growing market that could eventually threaten TechVision's enterprise software dominance. I flew back to Austin with a signed letter of intent and 60 days to complete due diligence before finalizing the acquisition. The return flight gave me time to process what had just happened and to prepare for the conversation I needed to have with Robert. That conversation took place the following Monday morning in Robert's office. I had requested a 30-minute meeting under the pretense of discussing my long-term career development goals at TechVision. It was a reasonable topic for a senior product manager who had been with the company for 4 years and had consistently delivered successful projects. "Jessica, good to see you," Robert said as I entered his office. "How can I help with your career planning?" I had rehearsed this conversation carefully, but sitting across from Robert made me realize how much our relationship had changed over the past 8 months. He still respected my work on TechVision's enterprise products, but we both understood that our strategic perspectives had diverged significantly. I wanted to give you advance notice about a career opportunity that's developed outside of TechVision, I began. It's related to the consumer application work I've been doing in my spare time. Robert's expression shifted slightly. He had assumed that my consumer application development was more of a hobby than a serious business pursuit. What kind of opportunity? The meal planning application I've been working on has grown to over 40,000 users and attracted acquisition interest from Innovate Corp. They've made an offer that would allow me to lead their consumer food technology division while scaling the application nationally. The silence that followed lasted longer than I had expected. Robert was processing not just the fact that I would be leaving TechVision, but the implications of how wrong his assessment of the consumer market opportunity had been. Innovate Corp? He finally said. Our Innovate Corp? Yes. They've been expanding aggressively into consumer markets and see meal planning as a strategic priority. The acquisition values the application at $47 million. Robert leaned back in his chair, and I could see him recalculating everything he thought he understood about consumer market viability, technical feasibility, and partnership requirements. The meal planning concept he had rejected as too complex and speculative had not only succeeded, but had attracted their primary competitor's attention as a strategic acquisition. $47 million, he repeated quietly, for the application you proposed here 8 months ago. The same market opportunity, yes, though the execution approach was quite different from what would have been possible at TechVision. Robert understood the subtext immediately. I wasn't criticizing his decision to reject the concept for TechVision. I was acknowledging that he had been correct about TechVision's limitations while proving that he had been wrong about the opportunity itself. When would this transition happen? He asked. Innovate Corp would like to complete the acquisition within 60 days. I wanted to give you as much advance notice as possible so we can plan the transition of my current projects appropriately. The conversation that followed was professional, respectful, and tinged with the mutual recognition that we had both learned something important about the relationship between strategic caution and missed opportunities. Robert congratulated me on building something successful and acknowledged that my execution had been impressive. I thanked him for the learning opportunities at TechVision and assured him that my departure wouldn't disrupt any ongoing projects. Neither of us mentioned the obvious irony that Innovate Corp's acquisition of FreshPlate would give them competitive advantages in a market segment that TechVision had concluded wasn't worth pursuing. The news of my departure and the acquisition spread through TechVision's office within hours. Kevin and Amanda were particularly surprised to learn that the side project I had mentioned occasionally was actually a multi-million-dollar application with tens of thousands of active users. The contrast between their enterprise dashboard success and my consumer application success sparked discussions about market opportunities and career development paths that hadn't existed before. Some team members began questioning whether TechVision's exclusive focus on enterprise software was limiting their own professional growth opportunities. Others started exploring consumer application development as potential side projects. The acquisition had inadvertently demonstrated that significant value could be created outside of TechVision's established strategic boundaries. Robert responded to these discussions by initiating a comprehensive review of TechVision's market positioning and growth strategy. For the first time since I had known him, he began seriously exploring whether the company should expand beyond enterprise software into adjacent market segments that might offer faster growth and larger addressable markets. The review process included customer interviews, competitive analysis, technical capability assessments, and financial projections for various expansion scenarios. It was exactly the kind of thorough strategic planning that Robert excelled at, but it was happening 8 months after the optimal timing for entering the consumer meal planning market. Innovate Corp announced the FreshPlate acquisition 3 weeks later, through a press release that highlighted their commitment to consumer market expansion and their investment in food technology innovation. The announcement included quotes from Maria Rodriguez about FreshPlate's exceptional user engagement metrics and growth potential under Innovate Corp's ownership. Local Austin business publications picked up the story as an example of successful startup development in the city's growing technology sector. Several articles mentioned that FreshPlate had been developed by a former TechVision employee who had identified the meal planning opportunity while working on enterprise software projects. Robert called me the day after the press coverage appeared. "Congratulations on the media attention," he said. "You should be proud of what you've built." "Thank you. It's been an interesting journey from concept to acquisition." "I've been thinking about our conversation from 8 months ago," Robert continued. "I still believe I made the right decision for TechVision at that time, given our capabilities and strategic priorities. But I clearly underestimated the market opportunity and your ability to execute on it independently. Different companies have different risk tolerances and strategic approaches. There's no single right way to evaluate opportunities. True, but there are better and worse ways to recognize when someone on your team has identified something significant. I should have found a way to support your exploration of the concept, even if TechVision couldn't pursue it directly." That acknowledgement meant more to me than Robert probably realized. It wasn't an apology, because his strategic reasoning had been sound given TechVision's context. But it was recognition that dismissing market opportunities too quickly could cost more than pursuing them unsuccessfully. 6 months later, FreshPlate had expanded to 12 states under Innovate Corp's ownership and had grown to over 300,000 active users. The grocery industry partnerships had evolved into comprehensive data sharing agreements that enabled sophisticated demand forecasting and inventory optimization across multiple retail chains. More significantly, FreshPlate's success had validated Innovate Corp's broader consumer market strategy and attracted additional acquisition opportunities in adjacent technology segments. They had positioned themselves as the leading platform for consumer applications that created value for both individual users and business partners simultaneously. TechVision's strategic review had concluded that consumer market expansion remained too risky, given their existing commitments and capabilities. Robert had decided to focus on international expansion of their enterprise software offerings rather than diversifying into unfamiliar market segments. It was a reasonable strategic decision that reflected TechVision's strengths and leadership preferences. But it was also a decision that left TechVision competing in increasingly crowded enterprise software markets, while Innovate Corp expanded into consumer segments with higher growth potential and less established competition. The final irony came during a chance encounter at an Austin technology conference, where both Robert and I were speaking about product development strategies. During the networking reception afterward, Robert approached me with a smile that acknowledged everything that had happened without requiring either of us to relitigate past decisions. "I saw your presentation about consumer product development," he said. "Very impressive insights about market validation and user engagement. Thank you. I learned a lot about strategic patience and execution focus during my time at TechVision. Those lessons were crucial for FreshPlate's success." "I'm curious about something," Robert continued. "If you had to do it again, knowing what you know now, would you have approached the opportunity differently?" It was a thoughtful question that recognized both the success of my independent approach and the alternative path that might have been possible with different timing or different strategic flexibility. "I think the outcome worked out well for everyone," I replied. "You were right that TechVision wasn't positioned to pursue consumer market opportunities aggressively. I was right that the market opportunity was larger than it initially appeared. Sometimes the best solution is for the right opportunity to find the right company at the right time." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps. Though I can't help but wonder what might have been possible if I had been more creative about finding ways to support promising ideas that didn't fit our immediate strategic framework." That conversation stayed with me long after the conference ended. Because Robert's question had highlighted something important about how opportunities get recognized, evaluated, and pursued within organizations. The difference between identifying a market opportunity and successfully executing on that opportunity often comes down to having the right combination of vision, resources, and strategic courage at the same time. Sometimes that combination exists within a single company. Sometimes it requires entrepreneurs to pursue opportunities independently. And sometimes, as in the case of FreshPlate and Innovate Corp, it requires multiple organizations working together to create value that none of them could have achieved alone. The meal planning application that Robert had dismissed as unmarketable had become a $47 million validation of the opportunities that exist when someone is willing to solve real problems for underserved markets. But more than that, it had become proof that the biggest risk isn't pursuing opportunities that might not work. The biggest risk is missing opportunities that definitely will work for someone else. 18 months after the Innovate Corp acquisition, I stood in front of 300 food industry executives at the National Grocery Innovation Summit in Chicago, delivering the keynote address about technology platforms that create value across entire supply chains. The presentation title was From Consumer Need to Industry Transformation: How FreshPlate Redefined Grocery Customer Engagement. And it represented everything that had evolved since that first rejection meeting in Robert's conference room. FreshPlate had grown beyond anything I had imagined possible during those early prototype development sessions. Under Innovate Corp's ownership, the platform had expanded to 47 states with over 1.2 million active users. More significantly, it had spawned an entire ecosystem of related applications and services that addressed different aspects of food planning, purchasing, and consumption. The grocery industry partnerships had evolved into comprehensive data collaborations that helped retailers optimize everything from seasonal buying decisions to store layout configurations. Major chains were reporting average inventory efficiency improvements of 23% and customer retention rate increases of 38% in markets where FreshPlate integration was most comprehensive. But the transformation went deeper than operational metrics. FreshPlate had fundamentally changed how grocery retailers thought about customer relationships. Instead of viewing shoppers as transactional purchasers who made unpredictable buying decisions, retailers were learning to see them as planning partners, whose food preparation goals could be supported through better inventory management, promotional timing, and product recommendations. The platform had also attracted attention from unexpected industry segments. Healthcare systems were exploring partnerships that could help patients with dietary restrictions navigate grocery shopping more effectively. Food producers were investigating how meal planning data could inform product development and seasonal availability strategies. Even urban planning organizations were analyzing FreshPlate usage patterns to understand how transportation infrastructure affected food access in different neighborhoods. During the keynote presentation, I shared data about user behavior patterns that illustrated why FreshPlate had succeeded where other meal planning applications had failed. The key insight wasn't technological sophistication or marketing effectiveness. It was understanding that meal planning wasn't really about food preferences. It was about time management, budget optimization, and reducing the cognitive burden of daily decision-making for busy people juggling multiple priorities. The average FreshPlate user saves 2.3 hours per week on meal planning and grocery shopping combined, I explained to the audience. But more importantly, they reduce food waste by an average of 41%. And decrease their weekly grocery expenses by 17%. These improvements compound over time, creating sustained value that justifies continued engagement with the platform. The presentation also addressed the business model innovation that had made FreshPlate's rapid scaling possible. Unlike traditional consumer applications that relied exclusively on user subscription fees or advertising revenue, FreshPlate generated income from multiple sources: individual subscriptions, grocery industry partnerships, data analytics services, and integration fees from complementary platforms. This diversified revenue approach provided financial stability that enabled aggressive user acquisition strategies and continuous feature development without requiring unsustainable growth targets or premature monetization decisions that could compromise user experience quality. After the keynote, I was approached by several executives who wanted to discuss potential partnerships or licensing arrangements that could bring FreshPlate's technology to their specific market segments. A regional restaurant chain was interested in reverse engineering the platform to help customers plan home cooking projects that complemented their dining experiences. A meal delivery service wanted to integrate FreshPlate's inventory optimization algorithms into their supply chain management systems. Most intriguingly, a consortium of independent grocery stores was exploring whether FreshPlate's partnership model could help them compete more effectively against large national chains by providing customer engagement capabilities that would typically require massive technology investments. These conversations reinforced something that had become increasingly clear over the past 18 months. The meal planning opportunity I had identified at TechVision had been just the beginning of a much larger transformation in how technology could create value at the intersection of consumer behavior and retail operations. The flight back to Austin gave me time to reflect on how dramatically my professional trajectory had changed since leaving TechVision. As VP of Consumer Food Technology at Innovate Corp., I was responsible for a division that employed 47 people across engineering, user experience design, business development, and customer success. The annual budget I managed exceeded $12 million, funding not just FreshPlate's continued development, but also research into adjacent opportunities in nutrition tracking, cooking education, and sustainable food consumption. More personally satisfying was the recognition that the approach I had developed for identifying and validating market opportunities was being applied successfully to other projects within Innovate Corp's consumer division. The methodology I had used to research grocery shopping behavior patterns was now being used to evaluate opportunities in home fitness, personal finance, and educational technology. The core principles remained consistent across different market segments. Start with genuine user problems rather than technological capabilities. Validate assumptions through real user behavior rather than survey responses. And build partnerships with industry players who could provide distribution and domain expertise rather than attempting to develop all necessary capabilities internally. These principles had led to 3 additional product launches within Innovate Corp's consumer portfolio during my tenure, each following similar development patterns to FreshPlate's evolution from prototype to platform. The success rate was significantly higher than industry averages for consumer application development, and the time from concept validation to market launch was consistently shorter than traditional product development timelines. Innovate Corp's CEO, Maria Rodriguez, had begun referencing this approach as the FreshPlate methodology in internal strategy discussions and external investor presentations. The recognition was gratifying, but more importantly, it validated that the lessons learned from pursuing the meal planning opportunity could be systematized and applied to create consistent value across different market contexts. During one particularly memorable conversation with Maria, she had observed that my background in enterprise software development had actually provided advantages for consumer product development that weren't immediately obvious. The analytical thinking required for understanding complex business workflows translated well to mapping consumer behavior patterns. The discipline of defining measurable success criteria for enterprise features helped ensure that consumer features delivered concrete value rather than just engagement metrics. "You understand something that many consumer product developers miss," Maria had said. "People use applications to accomplish specific goals, not to be entertained. Whether they're managing business processes or planning family meals, they want tools that make their lives more efficient and predictable." That insight had become central to how I approached all product development decisions. Entertainment and engagement were important for user retention, but sustainable success required solving real problems in ways that created measurable improvements in people's daily routines. Meanwhile, TechVision's trajectory had continued along the path Robert had chosen after my departure. The company had expanded their enterprise software offerings into European markets and had successfully established partnerships with several international consulting firms that helped distribute their products to multinational corporations. Kevin and Amanda had both received promotions and were leading development teams focused on artificial intelligence integration and workflow automation features that enhance TechVision's competitive positioning in the business productivity market. Their technical expertise had contributed to several successful product launches that reinforced TechVision's reputation for sophisticated enterprise solutions. Robert had also implemented new processes for evaluating market opportunities and supporting employee innovation initiatives. The company now allocated dedicated time and budget for exploring adjacent business opportunities, and employees were encouraged to propose concepts that might extend TechVision's capabilities into related market segments. These changes had led to the development of 2 new product lines that expanded TechVision's addressable market, while building on their existing technical strengths. A project management platform designed specifically for creative agencies had achieved significant adoption among design and marketing firms. A financial reporting tool optimized for mid-sized companies had attracted interest from accounting firms and business consultants. The innovation process that Robert had established included formal procedures for supporting employee-driven initiatives that might not align perfectly with existing strategic priorities. Dedicated funding was available for prototype development, market research, and partnership exploration that could validate new opportunities without requiring immediate commitment to full product development. I learned about these developments through mutual connections in Austin's technology community and occasional encounters at industry events. The changes represented exactly the kind of strategic evolution that might have led to TechVision pursuing the meal planning opportunity if different processes had been in place 18 months earlier. During one chance meeting at a local tech meetup, Kevin approached me to discuss his own entrepreneurial interests. He had been developing a side project focused on workflow automation for small businesses, and was curious about my experience transitioning from employee to product leader within a larger organization. "I've been thinking about the meal planning app you built," he said. Not the specific concept, but the approach he used to validate the market and build partnerships. "Do you think that methodology could work for business productivity applications targeted at smaller companies?" The conversation that followed lasted over an hour and covered everything from market research techniques to partnership development strategies to user experience design principles that differed between enterprise and small business contexts. Kevin's questions demonstrated sophisticated thinking about market validation and product development that had clearly evolved during his time working on TechVision's new initiatives. "The biggest lesson from Fresh Plate wasn't about meal planning specifically," I explained. "It was about understanding the difference between what users say they want and what they actually need. Most meal planning applications failed because they focused on recipe discovery and meal variety rather than addressing the practical friction points that make meal planning difficult for busy people." Kevin nodded thoughtfully. "So for small business workflow automation, I should focus less on feature sophistication and more on identifying the specific inefficiencies that cause the most frustration in daily operations." "Exactly. And remember that small businesses have completely different constraints than enterprise organizations. They need solutions that work immediately without extensive setup or training. They can't afford to experiment with tools that might not deliver immediate value." The discussion reinforced something that had become increasingly clear to me over the past 18 months. The principles for identifying and validating market opportunities were fundamentally similar across different industries and customer segments. The specific tactics and partnership strategies varied significantly, but the underlying approach of understanding genuine user problems and building solutions that addressed those problems comprehensively remained consistent. 6 months later, Kevin launched his workflow automation platform and began building partnerships with small business consultants and accounting firms. His approach reflected many of the lessons we had discussed, and early user feedback suggested he had successfully identified genuine market needs that existing solutions were addressing inadequately. The success of his independent project led to conversations with Robert about whether TechVision should consider acquiring the platform or hiring Kevin as a product leader for a new small business division. The discussions represented exactly the kind of strategic flexibility that could have changed the outcome of my meal planning concept presentation if it had existed 18 months earlier. Robert and I had maintained a cordial professional relationship that included occasional updates about our respective projects and strategic insights about Austin's evolving technology ecosystem. During one particularly candid conversation, he had reflected on the lessons learned from my departure and FreshPlate's subsequent success. "I've been thinking about the difference between strategic caution and strategic paralysis," he had said. "There's a balance between protecting existing business success and exploring opportunities that could drive future growth. I think I was too far toward the protection side when you proposed the meal planning concept." "Strategic timing is always difficult," I had replied. "You made the right decision for TechVision's context at that time. The opportunity found a better home at Innovate Corp, where it could be supported with appropriate resources and market expertise. Perhaps, but I should have found ways to support your exploration of the opportunity even if TechVision couldn't pursue it directly. Losing talented people because they outgrow your current strategic framework is always expensive, even when it's the right decision for both parties." That acknowledgement had led to changes in how TechVision approached employee development and innovation support. The company now provided sabbatical opportunities for senior employees to explore market opportunities that might not align with immediate business priorities. They had also established an internal venture capital fund that could provide seed investment for employee-driven projects that might eventually become acquisition targets or partnership opportunities. These policy changes reflected Robert's recognition that the most valuable employees were often the ones who identified opportunities beyond existing organizational boundaries. Rather than losing those people to competitors or independent ventures, TechVision was learning to support their entrepreneurial interests in ways that could benefit both the individual and the company. The evolution of both TechVision's and Innovate Corp's approaches to innovation and opportunity development had broader implications for how technology companies could balance strategic focus with strategic flexibility. The FreshPlate experience had demonstrated that valuable opportunities often emerged at the intersection of different market segments or customer needs that weren't being addressed adequately by existing solutions. Companies that could identify and support these intersection opportunities were positioned to create new market categories rather than competing within established segments. Companies that focused exclusively on optimizing existing capabilities risked missing transformational opportunities that could redefine their competitive positioning. As I prepared for my next keynote presentation at the Consumer Technology Innovation Conference in San Francisco, I realized that the meal planning application that had started as a side project had become a case study in how individual initiative and organizational support could combine to create value that neither could achieve independently. The presentation would focus on the broader implications of platform thinking for consumer technology development. Instead of building isolated applications that addressed specific user needs, successful consumer platforms created ecosystems that connected multiple stakeholders and enabled value creation across entire industry segments. FreshPlate had evolved from a meal planning tool into a grocery industry infrastructure platform that enabled retailers, food producers, healthcare organizations, and consumers to optimize their interactions in ways that created value for everyone involved. The lesson wasn't specific to food technology. It applied to any market where technology could reduce friction between different participants in complex value chains. The opportunity that Robert had dismissed as too complex for TechVision to pursue had become validation that complexity wasn't a barrier to success. It was often the source of sustainable competitive advantages that simpler solutions couldn't replicate. During the flight to San Francisco, I reviewed the presentation materials and reflected on how much had changed since that first conversation with Robert about consumer market opportunities. The meal planning concept that had seemed like a risky departure from established business models had become proof that the biggest opportunities often existed precisely where conventional wisdom suggested they were impossible to pursue. The keynote would conclude with advice for entrepreneurs and corporate innovation teams about recognizing and validating opportunities that might not fit existing organizational frameworks. Sometimes the most valuable contribution you can make is proving that something everyone believes is impossible is actually inevitable once someone commits to making it work. The audience would include executives from companies facing similar strategic decisions about market expansion, resource allocation, and opportunity evaluation. Many would be wrestling with the same questions that Robert had confronted 18 months earlier. How do you balance strategic focus with strategic flexibility? How do you support promising ideas that don't fit existing business models? How do you retain talented people whose vision extends beyond current organizational boundaries? The FreshPlate story offered one possible answer to those questions. But more importantly, it demonstrated that the answers often emerged through action rather than analysis. Sometimes the best way to evaluate an opportunity is to pursue it and learn what becomes possible when theory meets execution reality. 2 years after the San Francisco keynote, I received an unexpected email that would bring everything full circle in a way I never could have anticipated. The sender was Elena Vasquez, TechVision's newly appointed Chief Innovation Officer, a position that hadn't existed when I worked there. The subject line was straightforward: Strategic Partnership Exploration, Innovate Corp Consumer Division. The email explained that TechVision had been monitoring FreshPlate's evolution into a comprehensive grocery industry platform and was interested in exploring whether there might be synergies between their enterprise productivity tools and our consumer-facing applications. Specifically, they were investigating opportunities to help restaurants, food service companies, and grocery chains integrate their internal operations management with customer-facing meal planning and ordering systems. Elena's background was impressive. She had spent 8 years at McKinsey & Company, specializing in technology strategy for retail and food service clients before joining a venture capital firm that focused on enterprise software investments. Robert had recruited her specifically to lead TechVision's expansion into adjacent market segments that could leverage their existing technical capabilities while addressing new customer needs. The strategic initiative Elena described represented exactly the kind of thinking that might have led to TechVision pursuing the meal planning opportunity internally, if different leadership perspectives had existed 2 years earlier. Instead of viewing consumer applications and enterprise software as separate market categories, she was exploring how they could work together to create integrated solutions that served both business operators and end consumers simultaneously. We've been analyzing the grocery industry transformation that FreshPlate has helped accelerate, Elena wrote. Our enterprise clients in food service and retail are asking for better integration between their internal operations and customer engagement platforms. We think there might be opportunities for collaboration that could benefit both companies and create new value for our respective customer bases. The timing of Elena's outreach was particularly interesting because Innovate Corp had been conducting similar strategic analysis from the consumer platform perspective. Our grocery industry partnerships had revealed significant inefficiencies in how retailers managed the connection between their internal inventory systems and customer-facing applications. Many grocery chains were using sophisticated enterprise software to optimize their supply chain operations, while relying on completely separate systems to handle customer engagement and meal planning services. This disconnect created frustration for both retailers and consumers. Store managers couldn't easily coordinate promotional strategies with meal planning recommendations. Consumers received meal suggestions that didn't account for real-time inventory availability or seasonal purchasing decisions. Customer service representatives couldn't access integrated data when helping shoppers resolve issues with meal planning or grocery ordering. Maria Rodriguez had asked me to lead a research initiative exploring whether Innovate Corp should develop enterprise software capabilities internally, or pursue partnerships with established players who already understood business operations management. The Elena's email suggested that TechVision might be the ideal partner for creating integrated solutions that addressed these market gaps. I scheduled a call with Elena for the following week, curious to understand how TechVision's strategic thinking had evolved and whether the partnership opportunity she described could create genuine value for both organizations. The conversation lasted 90 minutes and covered everything from technical architecture to customer development strategies to competitive positioning considerations. Elena's approach to opportunity evaluation reflected many of the lessons that Robert had learned from my departure and FreshPlate's subsequent success. Instead of focusing primarily on whether proposed initiatives aligned with existing capabilities, she was asking whether they addressed genuine market needs that couldn't be solved adequately through current solutions. Instead of viewing partnerships as distractions from core business focus, she was exploring whether they could accelerate growth in ways that internal development couldn't achieve efficiently. We've been studying the FreshPlate case extensively, Elena explained during our call. Not just the product development approach, but the business model innovation and partnership strategies that enabled rapid scaling. Robert has been very transparent about the strategic lessons learned from that experience. She paused before continuing. He's also been clear that TechVision needs to evolve its approach to opportunity evaluation and employee innovation support. My role exists specifically because he recognized that the company was missing transformation opportunities by being too cautious about initiatives that didn't fit existing operational frameworks. The partnership proposal Elena outlined was sophisticated and comprehensive. TechVision would develop enterprise software modules that integrated with FreshPlate's consumer platform to provide restaurants and grocery stores with unified management systems for inventory optimization, customer engagement, and promotional coordination. Innovate Corp would enhance FreshPlate's capabilities to include features that helped consumers interact more effectively with businesses using TechVision's operational tools. The collaboration would create value for multiple stakeholder groups simultaneously. Restaurants could coordinate their menu planning with local grocery stores to promote complementary home cooking ingredients. Grocery stores could align their promotional strategies with meal planning recommendations to increase customer engagement and average transaction sizes. Consumers could access integrated experiences that made meal planning, grocery shopping, and dining decisions more efficient and cost-effective. From a business perspective, the partnership would allow both companies to address market opportunities that neither could pursue effectively independently. TechVision would gain access to consumer market expertise and grocery industry relationships that would take years to develop internally. Innovate Corp would leverage TechVision's enterprise software capabilities to create more comprehensive solutions for business customers who wanted integrated operational and customer engagement platforms. The financial projections are compelling for both organizations, Elena continued. But more importantly, we think this collaboration could establish both companies as leaders in an emerging market category that's going to become increasingly important as consumer expectations continue evolving. The market category she referenced was something that industry analysts had begun calling unified commerce platforms, integrated technology solutions that connected business operations with customer experiences in ways that created value for all participants. Instead of using separate systems for inventory management, customer engagement, promotional coordination, and operational analytics, businesses wanted platforms that could handle all these functions through coordinated interfaces. Freshplate had accidentally positioned itself at the center of this trend by creating connections between consumer meal planning and grocery industry operations. The partnership Elena proposed would formalize and expand these connections to include additional business segments while providing the enterprise-grade operational tools that larger organizations required. 3 weeks later, I flew to Austin for in-person partnership discussions that included Elena, Robert, Maria Rodriguez, and senior leadership from both companies. The meetings took place in TechVision's conference room, the same space where I had presented the meal planning concept 2.5 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, particularly Robert, who acknowledged it directly during the opening session. This is an interesting example of how opportunities can find the right organizational context at the right time, he said. The meal planning concept that Jessica proposed was legitimate and valuable, but TechVision wasn't positioned to pursue it successfully at that time. Now we're exploring how to collaborate on market opportunities that build on what Innovate Corp has accomplished, while leveraging capabilities that TechVision has developed since then. The discussions that followed were remarkably productive, reflecting the mutual respect that had developed between the organizations and the strategic clarity that both companies had achieved about their respective strengths and market positioning. Instead of viewing the partnership as a way to compete more effectively against external competitors, both teams approached it as an opportunity to create new market value that couldn't be replicated by traditional competitive approaches. Maria Rodriguez was particularly interested in understanding how the partnership could accelerate Innovate Corp's expansion into adjacent consumer technology segments. Freshplate's success had demonstrated the viability of platform thinking for consumer applications, but scaling that approach to multiple market categories required enterprise-grade technical infrastructure and business operations expertise that TechVision had already developed. Robert focused on ensuring that the partnership would enhance rather than distract from TechVision's core enterprise software business. The grocery industry collaboration needed to demonstrate clear value for existing customers, while opening pathways to new market segments that could drive sustainable growth. The partnership couldn't be pursued as an interesting experiment. It needed to contribute measurably to TechVision's strategic objectives. Elena's role throughout the discussions was to ensure that both organizations maintained focus on the customer value creation opportunities that justified the partnership complexity. Integrated commerce platforms would only succeed if they solved genuine problems for businesses and consumers that existing solutions addressed inadequately. The technical sophistication and business model innovation were means to that end, not objectives in themselves. By the end of the 2-day meeting, we had outlined a partnership framework that addressed the strategic priorities of both organizations, while creating clear pathways for measuring success and adjusting approaches based on market feedback. The initial collaboration would focus on developing integrated solutions for mid-sized grocery chains and restaurant groups that wanted to enhance customer engagement without requiring massive technology investments. The pilot program would launch in 3 Texas markets where both companies had existing customer relationships and operational familiarity. Success metrics would include customer adoption rates, business partner satisfaction scores, revenue generation for both companies, and user engagement improvements that indicated genuine value creation rather than temporary novelty effects. More ambitiously, the partnership would establish a foundation for expanding integrated commerce capabilities to other retail and service industry segments, where similar opportunities existed for connecting business operations with customer experience optimization. The grocery and restaurant focus was a starting point for developing capabilities that could address much larger market opportunities. 6 months later, the pilot program was demonstrating exactly the kind of success that validated the strategic thinking behind the partnership. Participating grocery stores reported average revenue increases of 18% and customer retention improvements of 27%. Restaurant partners achieved food cost optimization savings averaging 12%, while increasing customer visit frequency by 31% through integrated meal planning promotions. Consumer adoption exceeded projections significantly. Users appreciated having unified experiences that connected their meal planning decisions with promotional offers, restaurant recommendations, and grocery shopping optimization. Instead of managing multiple applications and loyalty programs separately, they could coordinate their food-related decisions through integrated platforms that save time and money while providing better outcomes. The technical integration between TechVision's enterprise tools and Innovate Corp's consumer applications had required substantial development investment from both companies, but the results demonstrated that the complexity was justified by user value and business partner benefits. The unified commerce approach was creating network effects that made each additional participant more valuable to the overall platform. Elena's leadership throughout the pilot program development had been instrumental in maintaining strategic focus, while navigating the inevitable challenges of coordinating product development across two organizations with different operational cultures and decision-making processes. Her background in strategy consulting provided frameworks for managing partnership complexity, while her venture capital experience helped maintain focus on metrics that indicated sustainable value creation. During one particularly memorable conversation, Elena reflected on how the partnership had validated the strategic evolution that Robert had initiated after my departure from TechVision. The Fresh Plate experience taught us that the biggest opportunities often exist at the intersection of different market segments or customer needs, she said. But pursuing those opportunities successfully requires capabilities that no single organization can develop efficiently in isolation. The partnership with Innovate Corp represented a new approach to strategic innovation that balanced TechVision's traditional focus on operational excellence with more aggressive exploration of adjacent market opportunities. Instead of choosing between strategic caution and strategic boldness, the collaboration enabled both companies to pursue ambitious initiatives while managing risk through shared resources and complementary expertise. As the pilot program expanded to additional markets across Texas and Oklahoma, both organizations began receiving inquiries from companies in other industries who were interested in similar integrated commerce solutions. Food service distributors wanted platforms that connected their inventory management with restaurant ordering and menu planning systems. Healthcare organizations were exploring whether meal planning integration could support dietary compliance and nutritional counseling services. The success was also attracting attention from larger technology companies who recognized that unified commerce platforms represented a significant market opportunity that traditional enterprise software and consumer application approaches were addressing inadequately. Amazon, Microsoft, and Google were all developing competing solutions that attempted to connect business operations with customer experience optimization. This competitive pressure reinforced the importance of the partnership between TechVision and Innovate Corp. Neither company could have developed comprehensive, unified commerce capabilities quickly enough to establish market leadership independently. The collaboration enabled both organizations to compete effectively against much larger competitors by combining specialized expertise in ways that created unique value propositions. The financial results of the partnership exceeded projections for both companies. TechVision's revenue from grocery and restaurant industry clients increased by 43% within the first year of the collaboration. Innovate Corp's consumer platform revenue grew by 37% as integrated business partnerships enhanced user engagement and expanded service offerings. More importantly, the partnership had created a foundation for sustainable competitive advantages that would be difficult for competitors to replicate. The technical integration between enterprise operations and consumer experience platforms required deep understanding of both business processes and user behavior patterns. The business relationships with grocery stores and restaurants provided distribution channels and market insights that took years to develop. Robert's strategic evolution from the cautious approach that had led to rejecting the meal planning concept to the partnership thinking that enabled the unified commerce collaboration, represented a case study in how organizations could learn from missed opportunities without compromising their core strengths. During the partnership announcement press conference, Robert acknowledged the connection between the current collaboration and the lessons learned from my earlier departure. Sometimes the most valuable contribution leaders can make is recognizing when promising opportunities require different approaches than existing organizational frameworks can support, he said. The partnership with Innovate Corp represents our commitment to pursuing significant market opportunities through collaboration rather than missing them through excessive caution. Maria Rodriguez's comments during the same press conference emphasized how the partnership validated Innovate Corp's strategy of building consumer platforms that created value for multiple stakeholder groups. The grocery industry transformation that FreshPlate initiated demonstrated that the most sustainable consumer applications are those that solve problems for businesses and end users simultaneously, she explained. The partnership with TechVision extends that thinking to create integrated solutions that address much larger market opportunities. 2 years after the partnership launch, I was invited to speak at the Austin Technology Leadership Forum about the evolution from individual innovation to organizational collaboration. The presentation would address how entrepreneurial initiatives within companies could lead to strategic partnerships that created industry-wide transformation rather than competitive advantages for single organizations. The audience would include entrepreneurs, corporate executives, and venture capital investors who were all wrestling with similar questions about opportunity identification, resource allocation, and collaboration strategies in rapidly evolving technology markets. Many would be evaluating whether their organizations should pursue ambitious initiatives independently or seek partnerships that could accelerate development while managing risk. The FreshPlate story, from initial concept rejection to unified commerce partnership, offered insights about how strategic thinking could evolve in response to market feedback and competitive pressures. The meal planning application that had started as a side project had become the foundation for industry collaboration that was redefining how businesses and consumers interacted across entire market segments. The presentation would conclude with observations about how individual initiative and organizational support could combine to create transformation that benefited entire industries rather than just successful companies. Sometimes the most valuable innovations were those that enabled collaboration rather than competitive dominance. As I prepared the presentation materials, I reflected on how much had changed since that first conversation with Robert about consumer market opportunities. The meal planning concept that had seemed like a risky departure from established business practices had become validation that the biggest opportunities often required exactly the kind of strategic boldness that conventional wisdom suggested was impossible to pursue safely. The partnership between TechVision and Innovate Corp represented proof that strategic evolution was possible for organizations willing to learn from both successes and missed opportunities. The unified commerce platform that emerged from their collaboration was creating value that neither company could have achieved independently, while establishing market leadership in an industry category that hadn't existed when I first proposed exploring meal planning applications. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.